Hi, I'm Carmen Lundy and welcome to Jazz Speaks Art. Today, we'll be talking about copyrights and music publishing. What is a copyright? How do you copyright a song? How do you publish a song? What is publishing exactly? And how do you become a publisher? Our special guest is composer, publishing administrator, owner of Dean Ligon Music. Say hello to Michael Ligon.
Hello, I'm Michael Ligon, principal at Dean Ligon Entertainment. Yes, I am a musician. I majored in piano and in double bass and went to college for it on scholarship and graduated. At some point, I always knew I wanted to be a singer in addition to playing piano. So once I was working with a vocal coach who was also the vocal coach of a Motown, then Atlantic artist, and he said, you two should write together. And we did. The artist is Stacy Lattisaw. One of my songs appeared on one of her first Motown releases. That got me curious about how does a creative person benefit from the business side of it, and I then became a music publisher. I have worked to ensure that creative people get what is due them from the business world.
What is a copyright?
A copyright is documentation of your ownership as a citizen of the United States or any country that is partnered to the Berne Convention internationally. And by virtue of being a citizen, when you create something, you own it. That is, it is not an amendment to the Constitution. It's one of the beginning portions of the Constitution that says, with rights to liberty and pursuit of happiness and property. Well, the song happens to be intellectual property. So once you've created it, you own it. I believe the official definition is once it is intrinsically created, you own it. But that doesn't do you much good if you die or if there's any question about it. So the Library of Congress is an extension of Congress, which documents these creations. And what's important is a copyright certificate. And that is a certificate that verifies that you are the creator of a said work. And it is housed once you do this certificate at cost. Once you do this and pay for it, you have a certificate which is stored in the United States Library of Congress.
How do you copyright a song?
An official way of copyrighting a song is to send in a registration to the Library of Congress, the Copyright Office. You'll hear stories about people mailing it to themselves in an envelope, which is documentation, but it is not as official as a copyright. A copyright is a certificate that everyone recognizes, and it has certain information in it that a self-addressed envelope won't have. Like who contributed what, when was it done, when was it created, the dates, and all those sorts of important things.
And you can get this online. You can obtain this online, correct?
Library of Congress online, the Google, any search on it will get you to the official site in which then you have to go to copywriting a work.
So tell us exactly, Michael, what is a publisher? Or what does publishing mean?
Music publishing is essentially the business end of what all of us think of creative. You think of a song, you think of a singer or an instrumentalist, someone creating something. Well, those creations have to be put into the marketplace. And typically a publisher is the one who is responsible for helping get that creation into the marketplace and getting paid for it. You can do it yourself, but still someone needs to be concerned about the negotiations where it applies and how to get paid exactly.
How do you become a publisher? Are there any guidelines to become a publisher?
You become a publisher when you take on the role of working on getting the creation into the marketplace and collecting for it. There are large organizations like the big BMGs and the Sonys and the Warner Musics who do that solely for a livelihood. Then you have people who are self-published, and what they typically have to do is replicate what the business people do in addition to their work. But if you wanted to be a publisher, anyone, whether it's a large organization or whether it's an individual, you have to establish that you're a business entity, you're a sole proprietor, you're an LLC, or some business organization. You get an account through a bank which handles your financial transactions. And then you talk to those people who are interested in using the work in the marketplace.
What does a person do to become a publisher?
One of the first things a publisher would need to do is have access and control over copyrighted works. Once that happens and there's income generating, and you can be a publisher without any income being generated. You simply are the business arm of the ownership for the work. Now, when it starts making money, you need to have registration in certain organizations so that they know who to pay. For example, if your work is being broadcast over television and radio, those will be called performing rights organizations.
Can you tell us about PROs, or performing rights organizations?
In this country, every country has one or two. We have three of them. We have ASCAP, American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. We have BMI, which is Broadcast Music Incorporated, and there's CSAC, and I don't think that stands for anything other than CSAC. In the U.S., you have those three organizations which issue blanket licenses for the use of broadcasting the music.
You mentioned ASCAP, you mentioned BMI. What does the Performing Rights Society do on behalf of the composer and publisher?
A PRO, or Performing Rights Organization, collects the income which is generated from broadcasts or public performances. That could mean if you're in the symphony hall or in the jazz hall, that is a public performance, and the PROs should pay you on the basis of those performances. When you think of broadcasts, you think of radio and you think of television, and those are syndicated and they have lots of outlets, and because there's so many of them, they multiply and they bring in significant amounts of income in many cases. A PRO's goal and mission is to collect on creative property. It doesn't matter what the genre is. Certainly there's a broader audience for certain sorts of music, so the income should be broader. So as business people, they most want to go to the genre that makes the most money. But its mission is to support and collect fees on all of the music that is licensed.
Can you tell us about mechanical rights? What is a mechanical royalty?
Well, mechanical rights are clearly related to the royalties, the income generated. And mechanical comes from the days when you had a mechanical reproduction, player pianos. With the piano rolls, there was a company called the Aeolian, which made pianos that played this music that you'd hear, Scott Joplin and Jelly Roll Morton and those people. It was a mechanical reproduction of an creative work. So years later, we got to have things like CDs and records, 45s and 33 1/3 and vinyl. Those are mechanical reproductions of a master recording. So each time think of it like product, any other product, soap. If you make 10 boxes of soap, then you want to get paid for 10 boxes of soap. If you reproduce 10 copies of recording, you want to get paid for those because there's a cost to producing each of them. So the mechanical rights and how a creator is paid is based on legislation. There is a copyright tribunal board that decides how much money each writer will get for each song on an album. And for the last decade or so, that has been 0.091 cents per unit. So if you write a song, you get less than a dime, 0.091 cents on every unit is sold. If you sell 100 of those, put some zeros behind it, and you get something like $9. Put some like 1 million, then you get $91,000 for it. And that's easy to tell what your earnings would be for a mechanical recording and a mechanical royalty. When you see your statement from the person who is distributing or owning the mechanical recordings, you should see clearly the number of units that were sold. You simply multiply that by the rate per unit and you get your sum of what you should get, what is earned. Now, what's important to know is that covers the entire song, and this is why writing and publishing is important. Typically, the publisher gets half of that, and the writer gets the other half. So if we're talking about $90,000, then you know as a writer, if you're the only or the sole author or writer, you get that $45,000 and the publisher gets the other $45,000. And presumably, the publisher has invested enough income, management, and other things to help you generate that income so that it'll be worth the publisher's getting 50% of it. And that's typically what happened. Publisher gets 50% of the mechanical royalties, and the writer or writers get the other collective 50%. If there are two writers and you split it in half, then you get half of 45. So it may not be quite as simple as 5 units or 10 or 1 million units. The record company uses its business acumen to keep as much money as they can. And yes, you're at the mercy of their reporting accurately to you how many records they pressed. But they are not obligated to tell you how many records they press. They are obligated to report to you contractually on how many records they've sold. Now, the difference between what they've pressed and what they sold can be significant because they make allowances in the contract for things like demonstration recordings. And back in the days when you had vinyl, there was breakage. So you'd expect so many things to be just simply lost and you wouldn't get paid on it. They're saying, well, we can't pay you on something we didn't sell. So the bottom line is you should be getting paid on what is sold. And if you look carefully at royalty statements and contracts, the record companies have a certain amount of time to pay you on those because they have to collect from all their distributors. And they have time frames from which they must pay, and they go over into quarters. But if you have question about what is being paid to you, you can hire an audit at cost to look at the books and see exactly what has happened. And often you do find some discrepancies. If you ever worked in accounting, you can appreciate that there will be some differences in the way things are done. Sometimes it will be to the artist's advantage because you'll discover monies that should have been paid to the artist. And it doesn't have to be intentional errors. It can be simple things like if there are two writers, who gets what? And sometimes the contracts are not clear. I've seen issues where one of the writers was not paid at all because through some administrative process, the name was never entered and it never got a percentage to pay. So these are back to contracts. When you do write a song, as important as a copyright is an agreement of assignment. And that is who wrote what and what percentages are they going to share. So I think as important as a copyright, which lists contributions, should be a sheet that defines who contributed and what is the agreed amount of splits. When you take away all the contribution details and you look at 3 writers on a song, the easiest thing to do is say 33 1/3. If there are 2 writers, the general rule is if there are 2 people, then it's an equally divided split. If there are 3 people, a 3-way equally divided split. There is an assumption that we're going to live and we're going to have a chance to make money as a living person. And in fact, many of the people in the catalog that I represent, their music is still out there, but they are not with us. But the music is still being used. It is still a product. So it is important to understand streams of revenue other than those created by a living person. The fact that we have ways to document and reproduce a live performance allows for the product to continue. And the persons who created it and run the business of it still need to be paid for it as long as it's being used in the marketplace. So it's important to know the different streams and how they relate, because at any moment a live performer could cease to exist and all of the product still is available for commercial use. So it's important to know what those streams are and how to get to them.
Thank you, Michael. I hope that so many others will now be enlightened as to how we protect our intellectual property. Thank you for joining us.